So, for those of you who are trickling in or who have already arrived, welcome to our virtual panel on, as Nora mentioned, cultural approaches to sort of bringing about an end to the nuclear age, or that's sort of our overarching theme that we are working with this evening. We have three really great practitioners of various forms of visual arts who are with us this evening that we'll get into introductions in a moment. My name is Raleigh Joyner. I am the programs coordinator over at the Goethe-Institut German Cultural Center in Washington, D.C. I sit in Washington, D.C. and also right over the D.C. line in Tacoma Park, Maryland. And it's really nice to be able to, it's always a pleasure to do work with Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung, with Nora Löhle, the program director for energy, environment over at Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung North America, and also with Linda Pentz-Gunter, who is the curator and editor at Beyond Nuclear International. The three of us have, the three of our organizations have had a really long history of working together for events. We sort of started with doing kind of one event per year, usually around the time of the Chernobyl and Fukushima anniversary. So usually March, April, we would try to shoot for doing one thing a year. And since, I would say since the beginning of the pandemic, we just kept brainstorming more and we kept thinking of more ideas. And we pulled off last year a couple of events. One thing, the first biggest one that comes to mind was an event on a Cuban movie called Un Traductor, and sort of the relationship between Cuban doctors and the anti-nuclear movement, and also oddly an interesting connection to COVID-19. And then we've also done a panel on the role of documentary filmmaking. We did two really great movies, a documentary called The Beekeeper from the United Kingdom, as well as a documentary from Germany called 33 Days of Utopia. And so we've had some really interesting discussions virtually throughout the era of virtual events. And it's always really great to work with this particular partnership and see what we can come up with. So we're really happy to bring this event to you all this evening. And I would like to hand the more formal introduction of the speakers over to Linda Pentz-Gunter. So.
Thank you, Raleigh, and I certainly echo those thoughts. And let's have some fun as well. This is sometimes a very serious, gloomy issue, and I think it's wonderful to be able to liven it up a little bit with this opportunity to look at the arts in particular. I'm going to make the introductions now to our wonderful guests. You probably have seen their bios on the invitation, so I'm not going to read great long histories here, but just enough to give you an idea of who we have with us tonight. So Runa is a fashion designer and environmentalist who uses fashion to advocate for policy change. This includes a deep concern about and commitment to climate change, the health of the oceans, and reducing waste, as well as to peace and to a nuclear-free world. She works closely with the United Nations, ICANN, and the Prince Albert II Foundation, amongst many, with a particular interest in educating youth. Welcome to Runa. Lou Dore is an award-winning artist, writer, and designer who has been creating artwork with a focus on conditions harming and potentially destroying our planet. This includes war, melting of glacial ice, plastics in the ocean, and the negative consequences of nuclear power. The Fukushima disaster in particular awakened her to the nuclear danger, and she has done a series of paintings reflecting her feelings about that disaster. Welcome, Lou. Jessica Grindstaff is a founder director of the New York City-based Phantom Limb Company, which creates iconic stories often focused on the climate emergency and environmental justice, or environmental injustice, I should say. She is a playwright and creative director, as well as an artist, all of which inspired her to create Phantom Limb's environmental trilogy, of which Falling Out, focused around the March the 11th triple disasters in Japan, is the third installment. So welcome to you, Jessica. And I want to also welcome our audience tonight. Thank you so much for being with us. I hope you've all had a chance to view the websites of these three remarkable women and also their beautiful videos. If you haven't, I will put in the chat later the links so you can take a look at them. So to begin our discussion, what struck me about all of your work and the evolution of your work is that you all express through your art a clear concern about climate change, but your artistic journeys also brought all of you to the nuclear issue as well. So Jessica, I want to begin with you and your environmental trilogy, the third of which, Falling Out, does bring us to Fukushima. But in part 1, 69 South, about Ernest Shackleton's Antarctic expedition, you address the issue of collective responsibility, a choice Shackleton made at the time and one we clearly need to make now when it comes to human survival on a global scale. So can you talk a little bit more about how you chose that particular story to also convey an important message about climate change, and how were you able to express that artistically on the stage?
Thank you. Thanks for having me here, for your question. Well, to be perfectly honest, our way in, my partner Eric Senko and I, our way into that story was actually really from a staging perspective. Like it was sort of a banal material relationship thing that we were interested in, like in palette and design. And then someone that was working with me recommended, she said, there's a grant to go to Antarctica if you're working on an art piece or a writing piece about Antarctica. And so I went to, it's the National Science Foundation's Artists and Writers Fellowship. So I went to that grant application, which took me 6 months to fill out. It was the hardest grant I've ever applied for. And the only real written part of the grant, it was all bureaucratic, basically, but the only written part was what are the broader impacts of this project? And I started to think about the implications of the story, like why retell the story of Shackleton? I mean, sure, we can do it in an interesting, dynamic, staged way, but like, well, actually, what are the broader impacts and reverberations through where our society is at right now? And I didn't actually fully answer that question. My way in was through climate change and kind of some feelings about the sort of leader that he was in his collective ensemble. And it was when I went to Antarctica and worked with the scientists on the base. The base is primarily scientists, and saw that most of the work being done there was actually about climate change. So even if someone was someone was studying seals, they were studying the change in their migration patterns because of climate change. And this is almost 20 years ago now, or 15 years ago that we went. So it was a very, very different conversation in America about climate change. Only 30% of people believed that it was actually happening and that humans had something to do with it. That's obviously quite a different number now. Anyway, I was very moved and inspired by the science that I saw taking place, the people that we worked with and collaborated with, and obviously the continent itself was staggering and put a perspective that I don't think I could have gained in any other way. And as I started to kind of get deeper into the story of Shackleton and Arctic explorers in general, it was the context of Shackleton within everyone else that was really fascinating, because every Arctic exploration that you read about during that time over and over and over again, there is some disaster that happens because people were ill prepared to deal with the geographic place and climate. And every time they kept on, and every time they lost all or most of their men. And Shackleton actually was 30 miles from the pole before Scott, and he realized that he could make it to the pole and be the first to have ever made it, but he made a decision to turn around and not do that because he understood that he would lose men on the way back in those 30 miles. And these are decisions that just weren't being made at the time, if you know Arctic exploration. So when his ship was crushed in the ice, now we all say, well, of course he turned around and tried to save all of his men, but it actually was quite a unique decision. And for me, that was the crux of the storytelling, that 69 degrees south is actually the moment of crisis where the ship was crushed in the ice. And I thought, like, what is the moment of crisis right now? And this is 2009 as we were making this piece. And there were actually many things that we could name as the crisis in 2009, but for me, what was most present was climate change. And so my question to audiences and my question in storytelling and looking at leadership and leadership in our communities and on a bigger level is that when we're faced with this moment of crisis, do we keep on with the objective that was in front of us, or do we stop everything and take a new assessment and make new choices? And at the time, as a society, we definitely were keeping on. And I mean, to be honest, it seems only now that there are some fundamental changes in decision making about how we're going to move forward at least in American society, which is where I live. So that's a very long-winded answer to sort of how we got to where we did. And then the question of how it's presented on stage is very difficult to answer, being a visual artist, because, I mean, especially then, I think we really rely on this sort of like dream-like wash and this visual information that people take in almost on a cellular level. I had people leave and say that they were dreaming of the piece months later, that they were so moved by it. And I don't think I could put a pin in it or my finger on exactly the moments where the messaging hit people in what way. Part of working with puppetry is that you're asking your audience to actually like collaborate on the meaning with you and to invest some of themselves in the storytelling. So with that piece in particular, it also was prior to Phantom Limb taking some real responsibility for messaging. So I can say everything that I just said, but it also, we started to work on accompanying elements like community engagement and panels and installations that accompanied the piece to kind of like deepen messaging and open up the conversation more with our audiences. But it's very long-winded.
So that was fascinating, and yeah, you're right. I mean, without sort of seeing it, and I hope you will all watch the videos later, without sort of seeing how this all works, it's very difficult to describe it in words. Do it justice. But I think, you know, that's interesting, that sort of on the ground experience, because I think, Mary Lou, you know, you also had that as in the days before COVID, you know, quite a world traveler, and you started to see with your own eyes the changes wrought by climate change as you travel the world, and that inspired some of your earlier work, for example, on coal. But then came the Fukushima nuclear disaster and the risks of nuclear power, an issue, you know, you seem to really have committed to now in a major way. So what was it about that event that awakens you both artistically and personally to the danger of nuclear power?
Well, that event was my first ability I found to put something on paper as an artist. It's a strange story. All of a sudden one day in my long-winded search for problems that are almost unsolvable with climate change, I had an inspiration: do nuclear. Duh, you know, where did that come from? I had no idea. But as an artist, you listen. And I listened, and I thought, I know nothing as a scientist or anything about nuclear. So as Mother Nature would do something, I broke my leg, squashed my knee, and I couldn't do anything. I was stuck in bed. And that's when I did research, after tons of research on the nuclear problem, the nuclear situation, the results of nuclear radioactive hotspots, and I mean, all over the world, et cetera. And I thought, how am I going to transcribe this onto a canvas? So and Fukushima had happened in 2011. This was 2015. And all of a sudden I realized I can draw. So I did a drawing. Actually, I might do a screen share right now, if that's okay. It's right here. Let Let's see how that comes up. It comes up. There it comes. And I can, supposed to be able, there we go. Oops, sorry about that. I'm supposed to make this a little bigger, and I'm just going to show it's a small painting or a small drawing. So this is a drawing of the plastic bags. There are thousands of these plastic bags that are just.
See it actually, Mary Lou. I'm not seeing it at the moment.
You're not?
No, we can't see it.
Can you see it now?
No, can you? No, sorry.
Well, okay, well, I'll just take that away. So I did a drawing of the plastic bags, and that was my beginning of studying and transcribing in my way what I felt about the disaster in Fukushima. And then a friend of mine sent me an easel. This is all storytelling, but it's very visual. Sent me an easel that I could go out with my little wheelchair and do paintings. And I sat there and I did, I don't know how many paintings, 24 inches by 24 inches of my interpretation of the severity of this particular nuclear disaster. And it went all the way from maybe for the plastic bags, for the robots trying to solve the problem, to the sadness of the 180,000 people that were displaced. And it was really tugging at my heart at the same time. And the more you, as an artist, as you work in these topics, you do research, you really delve into all aspects of the situation. It was very, very challenging. And then I finally did, the last one was this sort of barren landscape with fluorescent paint, everything's radioactive. And at that point, I had to stop because it was so overwhelming for me to see that this problem was being sugar-coated, there were cover-ups, the disaster was continuing, there were leaks. I mean, if anyone would take the time to just study what had actually happened and what is happening now, and the cost to humanity, the cost to Japan, you would be astonished. So after that, I had to take a break because it was so emotionally hard for me to continue doing the topic of the disaster. However, I decided to go maybe a few months later into studying just uranium and to delve even further into the topic of the atom and nuclear power. I figured, why not? I just study this some more. And I fractured my ankle. So Mother Nature, again, gave me a reprieve and gave me the time to actually study further and to do research, a lot of research there. I did not get any samples of radioactive rocks in my studio because you just don't do that. At least I wouldn't do that. But I did get permission to look at an author's books on the rocks. And I just did a whole series of just painting uranium rocks, trying to get a feeling for that powerful substance that is inside our Earth. I also did a series on the Radium Girls. I don't know if you all have heard of these poor young ladies in the 40s and 50s who were painting luminescent dials on watches, and they were using radium, which is 1,000 times more dangerous than uranium, and they died. That was shocking. And in the interim, I decided to go 3D instead of a 2D canvas. And I painted heads, which I have two samples here to show you. This is a head right here. And this is a head that represents, this is a uranium right there. You can see right here. And it's kind of, I did a series of these and they're very frightening. My daughter turns their heads around all the time because it's really frightening, but it was evocative for me of the problem of radioactivity, with the whole story that's involved with that. And I also heard Daniel Ellsberg speak. He wrote a book called Doomsday Machine and went to a talk. This was in 2017. And at the end of the talk, it was shattering, and shattering isn't even the word. It was frightening about how seriously affected our planet would be, of course, if there were a nuclear bomb. And we talked about the nuclear winter. So my last head that I could manage and summon up the courage to do, it's right here. It's just this ghastly looking head of people starving in I was, in my mind, I visualized it as, I hate to say this, but down in the New Zealand area, which would be the last area probably affected. I'm just guessing. Of course, I'm guessing at this. But people were starving because of the nuclear winter. And then I just had to, that was the end of my series of uranium and the rocks. And again, with all of, as you work with, as an artist, it takes a toll to really get involved deeply with these topics, and you read and do research, and you hear what people have to say, and you get, and then they talk about nuclear power being an absolute solution to the climate crisis. And you know, my feeling is I don't believe that it is. I don't know exactly how to solve that problem, but I'm willing to do research about it, and I'm willing to, in a way, do a visual documentation in the way that I can. That is my voice. And one of the reasons I'm so happy to be on this talk is I would like to encourage anybody in whatever sense, whatever little bit of creativity they have, to use their voice to speak, to talk what is bothering them, not to be afraid. And Biden last night, I just read this afternoon, and I'm going to quote him. He said, "In the search for greater meaning in our lives and the lives of the nation, we have seen the power of art in every form to heal, to comfort, and recover." I even get chills just saying that, because all of us here, all artists, all dancers, all performers, they do try to heal, and they do try to comfort, and we are trying to recover our planet. So thank you.
Thanks, Mary Lou. And I do want to revisit with you later a little bit more about the uranium and also the sort of the psychological impacts of this issue. But turning to you now, Runa, before we get into your connection with nuclear, especially the nuclear weapons and the peace movement, I wanted to just sort of backtrack a little bit so you can tell our audience a bit more about how you, when you first came into the fashion world, you know, what immediately struck you as disturbing about the amount of waste and what it was doing to the planet in terms of that kind of very consumeristic environment and throwing things away. And you made some, I think, really fascinating choices about how you make clothes, and, you know, that you can bury your dress in the garden, that you're using biodegradables and plant-based inks. So I'm interested to know a little bit more about the nexus that you started to see between sustainable fashion and climate activism, and how your work methods reflect those two things that are very important to you.
First of all, thank you so much, Linda, Nora, and Raleigh, and Beyond Nuclear and Goethe-Institut for having me. This is an extremely important conversation, and I'm definitely honored to be with fellow artists like Jessica and Mary. I'm a fashion environmentalist in the sense that I try to incorporate nature in most of my designs. Fashion, to give you a brief, we can keep on talking about this, but to make it really quick, is a $3 trillion industry that I'm a part of. It is responsible for 20% of the global wastewater that happens because of the textile dyeing and printing industry, and also the pesticides that go into, you know, building of the natural crops. It's also responsible for the carbon footprint that's generated from the transport industry, the microfibers that get into the oceans, and we can just keep talking about it. So when I started my work in the industry, I started working with corporates, and that's when I actually got to see the wastage that took place, especially with fabrics that were being programmed and then not used. So you were using fabrics for one season and then not using it for the next season because consumer demand got to be that big that nobody wanted the same print. So if you had the print, it was always used as like, it's so last season, I'm not going to wear it. And it eventually got to be a part of the business. So what I did was I decided when I started my own brand, I said that I was going to try a new concept, and this was using only stock fabric. And this was back in 2010. Stock fabric was not heard of. It was something that you would not even touch because you, as a designer, you had to program your own fabric, which means that creating new dyes, new prints, something that people were attracted to. And you had the buyers who would not buy pieces that were odd. If you had like a small, medium, and large, it had to be of the same color, the same print, and the same formula that had to be like the small, medium, and large. But I decided to go against it and would tell them, no, I don't have a small available, and I don't have a large, but I have a medium and an extra large, and would you want to buy that? Luckily, at that time, we had the e-commerce that burst into the market, so I started selling my products, and that worked really well. I decided to take it further by working with biodegradable fabrics, like what Linda just spoke about. And at that time, they had come up with a silk called Ahimsa silk, which is a non-violent silk, which allows the cocoons to hatch. It's a little more expensive because then you kind of thread the yarns together to make the silk. But at the same time, I think it's better for the ecology and for the environment. So I started working with fabrics of that sort and creating a technique called zero stitch, where there was no carbon footprint done by the machines. So everything was folded using only origami as a technique. And we had garments, and this is what I presented at the New York Fashion Week. Taking it another step further, I started experimenting with chlorophyll inks, which I extracted from plants. And if it's actually very simple logic, it's protein on protein. So if you use chlorophyll inks on silk, they will stay. For example, if you go, you take a dog out for a walk and you slip on a field of grass, for example, and to get the grass stains off, your linen pants are extremely difficult because that's what nature is. It's protein on protein. So I started working with those, and that started really picking up and took me to advocate with other designers and try to get them on board and say, why don't we all work towards sustainability? Because there was a new movement that was being started where consumers were being blamed. Yes, 65%, according to McKinsey, belongs to consumers, because consumers do not know what to do with their clothes when it comes to end of life. I do understand that, but it still did not make sense for companies to produce clothes and not know what to do with it, and just leave it to the end consumers. So we started a coalition where the designers came up with solutions as to what consumers could probably do with their clothes, or give it back to the designers, recycle it, and in some way, help abate climate change, which the industry was really responsible for. So this is what I started off with. And then I started working with the United Nations, and there was a very interesting conversation I had with a lady, and I was like, I don't know why we even, working towards climate change, because I think that there's such a big connection between social and environmental justice. That's when I started working with peace organizations like ICANN and, the International Peace Bureau, World Beyond War, and seeing how we could use art to get the message across to people and help them find the connection with humanity. I started creating this project called the Peace Flag Project, which again targets the consumers. So if you've got like old shirts, you converted that into a canvas, and you made your commitment on peace towards it. These canvases were then collected and then created to form a flag, which was then exhibited in various locations around the world. So you had climate change, you had peace, and you also had the consumers giving the clothes a next purpose of life. So yeah, so I think this is kind of what entails what I do.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the peace flag a little later on, and also your efforts with the whole situation in India and Pakistan as well. But turning back to you, Jessica, I do want to talk a little bit now about falling out, obviously, since that does take on the triple disasters in Japan, including the Fukushima disaster. And, we were lucky enough actually to see this live at the Kennedy Center. It was a breathtaking show, and with that combination of dance and movement and puppetry and lighting and video, you really brought to life, I think, that sense of the inundation, the ever higher piles of the black plastic radioactive bags. Interesting enough, that's an image that you, Mary Lou, also focused on and is in Jessica's show. The sorrow of humans somehow being out of control, of falling out, as you described, with each other as well. So what was for you, Jessica, having been there as well, I mean, what was the central thing about the Fukushima disaster that you most wanted to say in falling out?
What was the thing that I wanted to say the most? I think That's a great question. And I think that what I wanted to say before I went to Japan and what I wanted to say after were very different stories. And it actually took me quite a long time to process my experiences there. And my experiences mostly consisted of traveling up into the region and into the exclusion zone, and being in many places that were empty, like the exclusion zone, other than workers that were in the area, and documenting that emptiness and being in that space, and then meeting with people and listening to their stories and recording their stories. And for me, I mean, there was so much that I took on in that space. So obviously, there was so much sadness and so much loss, and loss of habitat and loss of family and loss of friends. There was one town that I was in where a man said he lost 100 of his friends in the tsunami. So, but I think what I came away with and what I wanted to communicate to the audience, and this is not explicitly about nuclear, and I had a lot of thoughts and realizations and aftermath of that conversation also, but was actually the value of hope. And hope is something that I have always, it's a word that I always thought was a bit throwaway. And I heard people talking about it a lot there. And there are people that I was speaking to who had lost everything. They couldn't eat the fruit on their trees. They lost family, they lost homes. Their community is not rebuilt because the Japanese government is not giving them the kind of support that they need. And also many of these communities lost all of the people that organized the communities, so the mayors and the representatives, and they were all lost in the tsunami. So it's sort of an impossible task, and the Japanese government is kind of denying that it is a problem and therefore not putting any support in, right? So this is the state. I mean, you're literally, and like people who are living on plains of loss, and they keep bringing up the word hope. And sort of 3/4 of the way through the trip, I started to feel almost kind of angry when I would hear this word. And I thought, okay, that means that you need to ask more questions and listen more. And so I did. And I started to say in the interviews, I'm losing track a little bit of what hope means. And so I wonder what it means to you. And the answers that I got were overwhelmingly kind of in two camps, and often both. One, there was always reference to community and connection with other people. And the other is that everyone mentioned very small things that were parts of their community. So a young person has come to intern with me to learn how to farm apples, and that gives me a new hope. The jungle gym, like the very small play center for children in the town, 11 years later, has finally been completed. That gives me hope. And I realized that there was an answer in that actually applied to a larger conversation about climate change, which is that this aggregation, I think, of small hopes and small things actually leads to real change in people's lives. And I, ending this trilogy after working for a decade on the subject of climate crisis, felt quite hopeless. And also in the kind of ends of the waves of the Trump presidency, which we didn't know, were the ends, feeling like actually there was really nothing that I could do. And I had even given up on sort of the small things in my life. I mean, yes, I was still putting the things in the recycling bin, but I wasn't doing all the little things because I think I felt, what is the word? I'm losing the word. Just sort of, the word that's coming up for me is calcified, but that's not the right word. But
yeah, it was a sort of paralysis almost, I think, or numbing,
yes,
right? But yeah,
exactly. And I think that is a condition that a lot of people were experiencing. And I felt like a total renewed energy. I thought, like, my God, you know, if these people who really are living at the ends of the earth, they're living in our future. I mean, I saw the future in Fukushima, and you can say I saw the future of climate change. You can see I saw the future of nuclear energy gone wrong. You can see I saw the future of climate injustice, where people who are poor and don't have the same access to education have not been given any support in the face of crisis. I saw that future. I saw what it looks like. And if those people can get up every morning and still create community and try to make change and try to build back, then we all should be getting up every day and doing all the tiny things that we can to lead to greater change. And I will say that right around this time, I can't remember the name of the author, there was a book that came out, became very trendy. I go to all the climate talks and I listen and I read everything. It became very trendy to say the consumer has no responsibility. The individual has no responsibility. This is all the byproduct of corporate evil. And there's nothing we can do. You can become a vegan, or you can recycle this, or you can do that, but it doesn't make a difference. And I have to say that I so wholeheartedly disagree with that, because the aggregation of billions of people doing small things leads to great change. And so it sort of came back around to the first message from Shackleton, right? Which is that, like, our decisions, every decision that we make, like, change happens one decision at a time. And they're not just President Biden standing up and making a big decision. It's every single day, every choice that we make. So that is the unexpected sort of, like, you know, mind-blowing experience I had, that I learned from those people. And I also learned in going to Hiroshima, I thought, like, this country has been scarred deeply by nuclear power historically, and I would like to go, even though these events are, you know, seemingly unrelated, I would like to go to Hiroshima and spend some time there. And one of the things that was so beautiful about that city is the remembering that happens all the time, and the teaching that happens through the remembering, and the preservation of stories of the people who went through the experience there. And if you go to the Hiroshima Museum, there are all of these rooms that you can sit in, and you can hear people recount their experience that day. And you can often see the evidence of it on them. And that is essential. The stories of the people that have gone through these things are essential. It's essential to keep them alive for future generations that are making these decisions every day. And also for those people too. I mean, I heard over and over again, the people I was interviewing in Fukushima, like, thank you so much for coming here 11 years later, and for listening and for caring, because we're forgotten. People aren't listening, people don't care. And so it felt like a real, it was an honor for me to be able to share those stories with audiences and to have their voices resonate across the US. I will say that someone from Japan came to see the show. They were interested in having it in, I won't say the name of the theater, but a premiere theater in Tokyo. And after they saw the piece, they said, oh, well, we thought it was about the tsunami. We didn't understand that it was so much also about the Fukushima disaster, and we cannot present that work. And the only way you'll be able to present that work in Japan is through private funding, because any art center is funded by the government and they're not going to present it, which is illuminating.
yeah. And I think that's where you and I connected a little bit in trying to see if there was some way in to get it shown in somewhere. And it proved to be, you know, a sort of insurmountable struggle. And then, of course, COVID came and paid to everything. But I think, you know, that this issue of hope is a really interesting theme. And Runa, you know, that must be something that praise on your mind, I think, and I do want to talk about your extraordinary trip to the Kashmir, the Pakistan-India border in Kashmir, which of course, as people know, is a very dangerous place. But you went there with a message of peace and a physical representation of that with the hand-painted kaftan that you put there on the fence with the flowers of both countries. And I'm wondering, what did you get a sense of the effect of that moment was? This is one of those small actions perhaps that Jessica's talking about that accumulates into the greater whole. Did you feel a sense of hope when you did this? What were you hoping to achieve by doing it, and what was the outcome for you of that moment?
It was definitely a sense of hope, and that's the reason I traveled. And to give you one of the reasons I went there, it probably goes back way into my past, because when I was born in Bangalore, which is a city in the south of India, and we were, in India, we kind of have these nuclear joint families. So you live with your grandparents and, everyone's living together. So there were times when my grandmother would always speak to me about war. This was when the Indo-China war happened. And she would talk about them walking through the roads, and they were these trenches, and we were kids. So we would listen with this amazement. Then there were trenches that were dug, and, they would go and they would huddle down there every time there would be an aircraft that went by. And she would be how they would, probably get under the beds when they would hear aircrafts flying over. So these stories kind of really struck with me. And at the same time, my country shares the border with Pakistan. We have so many people of Islamic descent who share, who are our neighbors, and we have such a wonderful time with them. In fact, we even celebrate festivals. So we have, somebody's having Christmas and somebody's having Eid, and you share food. Everything's perfectly fine. But at the same time, we've been told you should not like Pakistan. For what reason? I never understood that. And as a child, you have all these questions which adults don't get to answer, and you just keep quiet. But as you grow older, the questions stick with you. And what was really interesting was the entire country at that point hated war. So when the movie Killing Fields came out, people were like, no, I don't want to go and see it, because the older generation was it reminds us of what war was. But in 1998, when India had its testing for the nuclear missile, the whole country rejoiced, because they were oh, now we are a nuclear power and we are powerful. So there was this interesting dichotomy which really made absolutely no sense. It was nonsensical, because you had something that you signed saying that you were the not first to fire policy or something of that sort, but you'll still have it to defend yourself. Now, how can you defend yourself when you're getting attacked? It really didn't make sense. And at the same time, you are supposed to not like Pakistan or people who are Muslims, but at the same time, you're very good friends with them. So when I did travel to Jammu and Kashmir, it was a very important time. In August of 2019, the current government, which is the BJP, imposed that they scrapped this article called the 370. The 370 article gives Jammu and Kashmir this autonomous state where they can, in terms of democracy. But by scrapping it, they were trying to appease the Hindu majority in Jammu and Kashmir, and at the same time, put down their laws so that the Indian industrialists could go and, invest in them. I decided to go there because we were celebrating our independence in New Delhi. And at that time, Jammu and Kashmir was under lockdown. Now, that is something we heard, but we never knew what it was. So I took the next flight the day after the independence and went to Jammu. So when I went to Jammu, we landed and there was military personnel everywhere. There was no way for me to make a booking from New Delhi, which is the capital of India, to go to any hotel. So when I got out, we all went in a single file. And I took the first taxi that was outside, and I told him, please take me to a hotel which is, in the center of town. And he was kind enough to take me there. There was no internet, there was no electricity, they had no food in the kitchen. There was no way for them to even charge my card because there was nothing that was working. So I had to go to an ATM and I had to convince them, please keep my bags here because I've come all the way, not just from Delhi, but from the south of India. And I don't know anything around me right now. And when you walk on the streets, you had like these barbed wires. It was a total mess, but there was nobody on the streets except for armed personnel. So even going to the ATM, I was questioned as to why I was walking in a certain direction. And I was like, I need money, otherwise how am I going to survive? Luckily, you had like these guys in the, those little auto rickshaws, and they are so sweet. I think they were the most innocent people I'd ever come across, because I come from a city, and in cities, you're always used to bargaining, and like there's always this transaction that happens. And these people are so innocent. They were like, yeah, let me just take you. He took me to some ATM that was the only one which was functioning. I took the money, I came back, and I decided to stay there for 3 days. So the first I landed there, it was in the evening. There was no electricity, climbing up the stairs, no electricity. I was told to keep all the windows shut, which I did. There was no GPS, nothing. So I asked the guys at the hotel, and I said, I need to go to the Indo-Pakistan border. And they were like, I don't think you can go there because it's shut. And the taxi guy who I had got in touch with was outside the hotel, because he knew I was probably the only one staying there and needed somebody to take, needed me to have someone to take me around. So I asked him, I said, is this place open? And he said, you're lucky because it just got open today. So he took me in the taxi. We went all the way to the border. And in New Delhi, while this was happening, in my hotel, I decided to have a kaftan. Now, the kaftan is like a common garment which is worn by people in Pakistan and in India. So on one side of the kaftan, I had like the lotus which was painted. On the other side was the jasmine. So I took it over there, went to the border. The border security force was there, met those people. I could see the fellow Pakistanis on the other side, because there was no lockdown in Pakistan, and everyone had come by to see the border, and we were waving out, we were clicking photographs. It was so emotional. And what I was told from the guards from the Indian side and the Pakistan side was like, oh, you have this kaftan, it's so beautiful. Can I show you something that belongs to India and Pakistan? And we both own it. It was a banyan tree. It's the only living thing that belongs to both countries, because it's right at the border. And the tree is sacred by both countries. It's worshipped by the Sufi saints. It's worshipped by the Indian ascetics. So I went there, I put my kaftan there, and I was like, now this belongs to both the countries. So if we have time, I'm just going to very quickly share my screen, which will show you what I got to see there. So this is beautiful Jammu. This is again a panoramic view that I took where you have the Tavi River that's flowing by. This is the Tavi River, again, Jammu. It's, you've got the rich, you've got the poor. This is exactly how it was during lockdown. There was no one on the streets. You just had like the barbed wire. This is the line of defense. On the other side is Pakistan. So you could see all the Pakistani people, and you were waving out and saying hello. The barbed wire is just separating the two nations. Everyone's taking photographs of each other. This is India and Pakistan, the border. And that's the banyan tree that you see on the right. So I hung it over here, and I went on the other side secretly because I was not allowed to do it, but I got the permission to do it. So on the left, you see the jasmine, which is the flower of Pakistan. And on the right, you see the lotus, which is the national flower of India. And that's me with a selfie.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so
go ahead.
Yeah, so I was hoping that this is how art can probably help people understand and engage humanity in general, and realize that what we really hate is nonsensical. It really doesn't even make sense, at the end of the day. So I'm not a politician. I do not know much about policies, but I'm just a simple human being who knows what's right and what's wrong. And I try to advocate for that.
Thank you, Runa. And I will encourage those of you watching, do put some questions into the Q&A. We will be taking your written questions once we wrap up this part of the discussion. I'm not seeing any there yet, so I'm encouraged to continue to ask a couple more. There's so much more we could talk about, but I will ask a couple more questions. And you've addressed this a little bit, Mary Lou, already, but I did want to sort of get into the sort of this whole issue of you make this art, but at the same time, it's a very disturbing subject, whether it's about climate change, some of your work on coal but at the same time, it's visually very beautiful. So there's this tension between, this beautiful painting of uranium or coal or something like that, but at the same time, how do you still get through to your audience that this is actually something, fundamentally evil in a way? And I think about uranium, it's yellow, it got dug out of the ground. Humans were fascinated by perhaps its apparent beauty and not understanding fully its lethality, other than Native American legend, which says leave it in the ground, obviously, and Aboriginal legend too. But how do you sort of deal with the artistic process of painting something that comes across as beautiful, but is meant to be kind of a warning in a way, a do not touch?
Yeah. Was the Native Americans say the yellow dragon, the uranium in the ground. I just want to address one thing that Jessica was talking about, was hope and concern. And this is related to hopefully to your answer. In 2012, I had 2 paintings at the Olympics in London, Summer Olympics. And in those paintings, I had collaged pieces of plastic onto them, and it related to me to climate change, plastic in the oceans. That was kind of my beginning into my own personal awareness, kind of late in life, but it took a while to get there. And while I had the paintings up, and all of a sudden they said, well, you have to address a whole group of people. And I thought, oh my God, I didn't even know I was going to do this. So I had to sit in this chair in this big room, and all these people sitting around, a lot of younger people. And this young woman said, I am totally, utterly depressed. And I said, why? And she said, because she was almost not suicidal, but completely depressed about climate change. And it was the first time I had heard that in such a deep way. And she represented not just herself, but there were a lot of students in that group that I was talking with. And it took me aback. It was an eye-opener. So I came back home, and that's when I really started probing even more deeply, and not necessarily to create beautiful paintings, but I just did. And I worked by myself. So it was very quiet. Just every day I would go and paint whatever came to mind. And one of the thoughts I had, this was even in 2009, putting this plastic on my artwork, I was thinking, wouldn't it be very bizarre if this plastic were absorbed from the ocean, it turned into rain, and then we would end up with plastic icebergs? Voila, that's what's happening. We're finding microplastics in the mountains, in people's blood. It was just, that was really, I thought, well, I was surprised to read that just relatively currently. But when I'm painting, it doesn't necessarily translate into trying to create something beautiful. I just listen to the paint. I listen to the brush. I listen to the colors. And I did post one in the chat box called Fukushima Sorrows, and it's a plastic bag. And these tears appeared in the bag. And where that came from, you really cannot, it wasn't planned. It was spontaneous. And it was, I think as an artist, we're very lucky. We listen in other areas in our being. There's a way that it comes through if you're open. It just happens. And even painting the uranium rocks, when you consider, I did one called Zaire, which was where it reflected, it was horrible when they were taking the uranium out of the Congo, Zaire, and it was slavery to these people digging in these uranium pits. And then the uranium was transported across the ocean in totally unprotected containers, and then shipped to New York, Washington, the state of Washington, all over. When I was painting the painting, it came out to be very beautiful, but there was research. There's research underneath it all. And my hope is, to talk about hope, that some people, whomever, will look at these paintings and would say, why did you do that? What was the reason behind it? You never know, you don't address a particular artwork to a specific person. You do it, first of all, to get it out of your own being. And then secondly, hopefully somebody will see it. I guess, that was my visual voice. And it's extremely important, as I said early on, that art is our voice. It is our way of communicating what it is that's disturbing us. Now, not everybody does this. I have a friend who said, why are you painting about nuclear problems when you could just be painting roses? And I thought, it's a lot easier to paint roses. But there's a drive. Is it an innate drive? I really don't know. We've been talking about this a lot. What is it within oneself that allows that to come out spontaneously? I mean, it is spontaneous. And why can we not encourage others? I'm trying to encourage others to use their artistic voices to do the same thing. I think that's my message for the day.
That's wonderful, and thank you. And welcome back, Raleigh. I think I don't see any questions in the Q&A, but I know that you had a few. So I think right now what we'll do is I'll throw it to you, and maybe you'd like to follow up with some questions of your own. And then depending if we see any from the audience, we'll ask them. If we've got some time left, we can go pretty much till 8. If we got some time left, I'll throw in my last questions, which I haven't asked yet, because I do want the audience to get a chance to chime in as well.
Well, I had a thought because Janice put into the chat earlier, she said, my parents had a friend who was a Radium Girl, and she died young of leukemia in the East End of Toronto. And it made me think about, I would say in the last 5 years, I started to learn the story of the Radium Girls because for several reasons. There was a book about it, there was a movie that was made, and there is sort of a revisiting of that whole situation, because as I think Jessica used the word, forgotten, like the people of Fukushima feeling forgotten, and bringing justice to people who feel like they have been forgotten. And I think that story of the Radium Girls has been reopened because they were young, they were victimized, they were taken advantage of, and and Mary Lou, as I was looking at your work, I mean, I'm not an art historian, but I was thinking, I just like to look at art. And so some of the work that, came to mind when I was looking at your work was like, I thought of George O'Keeffe because of, like the way you use color. And of course, I thought that was interesting because she was based in New Mexico, which has its own history with the atomic age. But I also thought of, being from like a background of German culture, I thought of, especially like romantic art from the 1800s, and sort of we have some words in German that I think correspond really well to some of the themes you've been talking about. We have this word, das Unheimliche, or like the uncanny. We have das Grausame, or the grotesque, and like I thought about just these kinds of bleak landscapes from like Caspar David Friedrich, a couple of other different people. And then I thought of, I thought of also Goya, especially the way you sculpted and painted the head that was quite gaunt. And I thought, especially with Goya, the way he was painting that was reflecting the suffering that the Spanish people were going through under the Spanish crown at the time. And I just thought, I don't know. I was curious. Well, I had kind of different questions for everybody, but I thought I would ask you, like, who you like as an artist.
Oh, well, I like all the people you're talking about, but I just wanted to go back to the Radium Girls for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most hopeful, I don't know if it's hopeful, but I think it's hopeful. I found out last year that there are high schoolers who are doing a play about the Radium Girls. And I'm thinking, what an effective way to teach them how grotesque this whole story is, and about the cover up, and about I just was reading, I think, Linda, this is your article or someone's article about there's a park in New York City right off of Staten Island that is filled with leftovers from the radium chemical when they were doing the Radium Girls. And that's not the only place. And the government is cover up again, they don't really clean it. So the grotesqueness, actually, it was not an effort to look like Goya or to look like Francis Bacon at all. But maybe in life, one is one is influenced from all sorts of sources, and it comes through.
Right.
Even if you don't say, I don't want to do this that way, it happens, it comes through. And you see that with Runa's and Jessica's is, the warhorse play with puppets, which I'll never forget. And all of this comes through our creative abilities. And if you have a message, this is where I think we have a responsibility. We as humans in this era, in this point in time, which is so critical, we are responsible for trying to bring about change in whichever voice we have. So I don't know if that quite answered your question, but
yeah, it was
that's
kind of
what
an open thing. I mean, yeah, the observation about the comparisons was just like, oh,
thank you.
I
Yeah,
thought.
thank you. Anyway, I love George O'Keeffe anyway.
And yeah, and thank you for that response. And I think, the way you've described, yeah, like the grotesqueness, it kind of makes me think of, Runa, at the beginning of, like, right before we sort of started the webinar, you asked, like, should I go into the, like, intense detail of what I experienced when I went to Kashmir and when I went to the border? And we all said, yeah, you should. And and I think that I don't know, that ties into what I think all three of you talk about, which is, visually representing, something that people tend to overlook, or a group of people who don't have a voice, or who have been forgotten. And so I guess I was kind of, here's the cat appearance finally, and he can't help himself. But and Jessica and Runa, I was kind of curious with both of you, the idea of how your work does, bring it makes sure that certain narratives are not forgotten, or that certain groups of people are not overlooked. And Jessica, I thought the way that you were using the story of Shackleton, I mean, I also thought that was interesting, because it is something from history, and so, like, bringing something that happened almost 120 years ago into this kind of mixing it in with modern narratives. Yeah, I mean, I guess my question is, what the about the significance of making sure people don't forget these stories and don't forget these people, and I'm sorry about Hans, he always needs to make an appearance.
I lost the question a bit, I think, in there, but I will just say that I very much believe in the power of storytelling as an agent of change. And I feel like you see that all over culture, that real change happens when there's a story that people can somehow relate to. And so I just believe in that. And as a theater artist, I'm in a good position to share stories, and particularly as a theater artist that works with puppetry, which is a performative element that really only works through investment and empathy from the audience. I believe it's a way to create change, and I can't explicitly say how. It's something I'm just constantly mining, and I feel like I'm a student of, and will continue to practice and advocate for within our own company, and also through education whenever we get that opportunity with other people. But I really strongly believe in that.
Yeah, and I believe that humans are generally nurturing. I mean, we are good people, at the end of the day. But why is it that we have to fight for being good when it should be natural? Because all of us are united, and that's what keeps us together. So I think that is something that really drives me, because it's the basic connection between humanity and life, the trust, and hoping that we can get people to understand beyond political constructs, beyond religious constructs, beyond things that are man-made, but at the same time, hoping to unify people through what I can do, and that is art. If I was an author, I would have done that through my books. If I was a painter like Mary, I would have done that. But I do what I can do best to help educate the masses, and try to get a different section of society involved using fashion, not just that it's just, what fashion is, but people in the fashion industry to start understanding these problems that actually exist in the world.
And has the fashion industry been receptive at all to what you've been trying to change within that industry? I'm curious to know.
So in the beginning, the fashion industry started terming me as an artist more than a fashion designer. But over time, when they've started realizing that fashion activism can be really strong in changing mindsets of the people, and I was lucky enough that I work with departments of the United Nations which promote this activism. So when that happens, it obviously trickles down to a larger, younger group of people who want to join the movement. So the fashion industry is slowly realizing it and trying to even get that involved in the, in the shows that they have, having sustainability as a part of the whole program. But the connection between social and environmental justice is something that I think the fashion industry is working upon.
Jessica, I did want to just mention 12 Angry Animals as well, which is, I know, I think your newest production, perhaps, and based off 12 Angry Men, because we do tend to sort of talk about these issues in a very anthropocentric way a lot of the time. And so, and yet, as Runa, you said, we're good people, and we're good people that care not only about people, but also about the natural world, about animals. And so I was curious, Jessica, as to how, it looked like, from what I could see on the videos at least, you were sort of returning to that same idea of this collective responsibility of how, and that's especially important now under climate change, because it's not just us who will go under, it'll be all sorts of other species are going much faster, extinct much faster. So I just wondered if you'd like to talk a little bit about the inspiration behind this new piece and what you're saying with it in the context of climate change with 12 Angry Animals.
Thank you. So that piece it was completed at NYU as really a work in progress. And Freya, I can handle that part. It's okay. Thanks. Sorry. As a work in progress with students, and it was an adaptation of 12 Angry Men, as you mentioned. And I felt like we had spent 10 years talking about the topic of climate change from the human perspective, although the second piece was sort of from the perspective of a tree, but it was like really about our relationship to the forest. And I thought it would be interesting to turn the whole model around and have the conversation come from the voices of animals. And so we identified 12 animals that are currently critically endangered. And we made those the 12 men. And the idea was that there was one human left on this sort of, future apocalyptic, probably true version of where the planet is heading. And throughout the course of the play, it was a discussion about responsibility. And the play is definitely not finished. But I was engaged in a long process with the students because everything I do is highly collaborative. This was the first piece that we've done that was text-based. Everything else we've done is basically silent. So it was writing and rewriting the script with the performers. And there was a lot of also storytelling through movement, which we always do. The students were masked rather than using puppets. And we played with these conversations about responsibility, but actually what ended up sort of erupting also was a class structure even within the animals, which was really interesting to think about. And that, as you mentioned, climate injustice or climate justice is something that's really at the top of mind for me going forward in all of the work that we create. And the play was just looking at all these kind of power structures that develop and whose voice is louder and therefore gets what they need and want. And I mean, it truly was a play. Like we were playing and kind of learning about the story as we were writing it. And I think were I to do it again and work on it again, the pandemic has really like collapsed sort of all of my work, because people are not going to see live theater in the same way unless you're Broadway and you've been bailed out with millions of dollars. But were I to revisit that particular piece again, I think I would again like draw back from the language, and maybe actually have the piece be more movement based, with a sort of like a long kind of monologue conversation that was collaged over it, so the animals themselves weren't talking. I don't really know. So as you can hear, it's like it's not actually complete. I am working on a new piece now, which I think is kind of a triptych of 3 different places in the world that are at the front lines of climate change, and they're all indigenous communities. So there are 3 stories, and then there's 1 story interwoven of just like a me or a you, a person sitting in a kind of middle road, having the kind of conversation we're having right now, like what can I do, who am I, and the sort of like breakthroughs and banalities of that amongst these 3 real stories that are really about survival. And I'm trying to build in real-time audience activism into the model of the play, so that people are actually, we're building all different kinds of things, but like from fundraising to letter writing to phone calls, that those are happening real time as people are engaged with watching the piece of theater. So that's where I'm at right now.
And that seems to be actually sort of a common thread with all 3 of you, that you're not sort of just artists who just paint or just do fashion designs or theatre. You've all got that activism component. Is that, did that come as a sort of, not compulsion is the wrong word, but maybe did you feel like that was an essential and necessary part of your creative side of what you do, or did it kind of evolve as you began to learn more about what you were actually depicting through your art? I don't know if that's too obtuse a question, but
yeah, I mean, I no, it's a good question. It's definitely an evolution, but I also feel like it's helpful to give people tools to start to become active themselves. I spend a lot of time thinking about how I can do that in my life, but I find that a lot of other people either don't know how, or they may be ambivalent or slightly afraid or embarrassed to make phone calls or to write letters, and we can see actually how that has and does make a difference. And I think if you're in a communal space and people are inviting you to do that, and it becomes easier for you, and you may actually step out of the theater and then do that at another point. Those are pretty, what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, they're kind of reductive ideas. I think there are deeper ideas in there, but I think coming together and doing something together is something we need to practice. And I like the idea of building that into work. And yes, that's an evolution. I mean, look, things are becoming more and more precarious every single moment. So I think all of us artists are like, okay, how can we get even better at making a difference? And like, how can we make even more change with our audiences? So that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, Runa, do you feel that way? I mean, with the peace flag in particular, I'm curious to know where that's at, and because that seems like a very sort of a great way to engage people creatively, but also in some form of activism.
I completely agree with what Jessica said. It's so important to give people tools, right? So that they can be activists themselves. And when that starts happening, you already start creating a global movement in the right direction. So the peace flag was started off by trying to get consumers in the fashion industry, like you and me and everybody who basically wears clothes, to know what to do with their clothes when it comes to end of life. So it was a very simple concept where I got people to take their old bed sheets or their pillowcases or their t-shirts, cut them up into canvases, which were like 10 inches by 10 inches, and express what peace means to them. So I started off with schools in Half Moon Bay. It's a city by the Bay Area where I live. I got the peace resolution that was passed by 2 cities around here, and I had the New York State that passed the peace resolution to kind of advance the peace flag. So when this happened, apart from schools, I started also working with prisons. And currently I'm working with San Quentin Prison, where I think the most fabulous artworks have come out by the prisoners just using graphite chalk and wanting the world to know what their message for peace was. And I think it was so deep and so emotional, because at the end of the day, we're all human beings. Like I said, we're good people and we are working for a cause. So the peace flag definitely is growing. It had its mention at the UN. We couldn't have a physical exhibit because of COVID, but hopefully in February, we would have a physical exhibit in Nairobi. And the plan is to keep growing this internationally and travel it, have the physical flag travel across the world. So while this happens, people are educated on peace because we give them lectures, we have toolkits. They're also educated on climate change and the intersection. So that's where we are as of right now. And the last time we counted it was 6,000, but wow. I think after San Quentin, it would probably be double.
Wow. So we just want to say something. Linda? I just wanted to say something. Runa, first of all, I think I'm going to start using old shirts as canvases. Why not? And
exactly. You should.
Yeah, I mean, just gesso the old shirt or whatever it is and make that a movement. And the other thought I had, it's okay, it's great to do nuclear paintings, etc. But maybe I'm feeling, I have this intuition, it's time to focus on what we can do positively to help climate change. And today I read fascinating stories about using tidal waves. They're doing it in Scotland and they're doing it on the West Coast for energy. So I'm thinking, okay, how can that be translated into a visual that will also teach and be encouraging about, we don't need to have, I'm going to get shot for this. We don't need to have nuclear power plants. We have so many other alternatives. And now with the tidal wave under the water and the energy that's involved in that, it's amazing. It was such a refreshing, well, it's expensive, but it's a very refreshing direction. It's just another alternative. And that's a positive. That's a positive. We're always looking for positive messaging here. Oh, I'm suggesting.
Yeah. I think that's really fascinating, because I also feel like, the frustration, and we're not going to get into all the technology of nuclear here, because this is not the right forum for that. But I do find it fascinating that all the excitement in terms of, that kind of thing is about small nuclear, modular nuclear reactors, instead of about really advanced, innovative, truly new things. And why aren't people all excited about tidal power and wave power and the innovations with battery storage and all the things that are actually going on, which are actually new and could actually save us, and yet all the fascination is on something old and dangerous and obsolete and expensive and so forth. And so I think it would be fantastic if the visual arts world gets on board with helping to sell the excitement of the positive things that we could be doing and that we have to do to save ourselves in time. Because we're getting, tsunami, to use another, a word by the pro-nuclear lobby right now, to push for the retention of nuclear power as well as the construction of new ones, which is going to, of course, shoot climate progress in the foot totally. So I think, that's a great note to sort of inspire people who've got other talents, to use them in that way. And I don't know, Raleigh and Nora, if you want to ask any final questions. We're sort of heading towards the top of the hour. I'm not seeing any in the Q&A, but if there's anything else you'd like to throw in the mix, or we can wrap things up. If any of you three would like to say anything else that hasn't been covered as well, feel free to chime in as we close out the program.
We do have just a comment from Alice who says, Darmstadt was used as a practice bombing for Dresden during World War II. In the center of Darmstadt is a bombed out church. In it is a large human figure and a plaque that says, "We who are without hope, yet waiting for hope." So that was a comment from Alice. Maggie asked the question, where do each of you all, and we've touched on some of these topics, but maybe if, I don't know, this might be a nice wrap-up question. Where do each of you get the hope, inspiration, and courage to move through the pain and use your art and storytelling to reach people on an emotional level? If anybody wants to tap.
Just a real quick one. I think you not be afraid to listen to a voice, an intuitive voice, and with the realization, you know what the heck is going on. So that's my comment about that.
Yeah, I guess it's a calling, you know, that every artist and every creator has. It's a calling that comes to you at some point, and you know, you just grasp it and you're like, yes, this is what my life's purpose is. It's some, I cannot explain it. It's difficult. It's almost emotional, you know, it's deeper, but I guess it's a calling for me and for all of us here right now. And that's why we're having this, because we're looking for a bigger cause.
And because I think, you know, it's sort of a choice, isn't it? You can do nothing. So for some of us, it's very difficult to say, well, and I think, you know, that touches on, Jessica, where you kind of found yourself earlier, where you started to feel kind of hopeless and paralyzed, and what's the point, you know, where everything's shut down. And then you listen to the hope in the voices of those folks that you talk to in Japan, and it kind of reawakens that something that's sort of intrinsic maybe to all of us, that we can't just sit around and go, well, it's all hopeless, I'm not going to do anything. That you have to, whatever it is you do has to have some component of it that helps inspire others or motivate yourself and others to, even whether it's very down in the community level or on a sort of national stage. I mean, you have the opportunity to run at the UN too, so you have, you know, a significant platform, I would say, on an international level. So it's fascinating that you're also doing something in Half Moon Bay, you know, which is very much on the local level. And I think that really tells that story of how important all those pieces of the puzzle are, and that each of you are contributing very essential components in your own way to a very big puzzle, which if we all do enough of it, maybe we can survive. So yeah, I found that very interesting analogy that you made, all of you. Are there any last final words that anyone would like to offer before we say goodbye? And thank you for your time. I know it's late for some and early for others, but we appreciate all of you being here in the audience as well.
I wanted to say that I get inspiration from, I mean, obviously hope and inspiration from my children, but also from my fellow artists. So it's conversations like these, and going to see exhibitions and studying, you know, the elders that made work before us, I find incredibly inspiring, and it keeps me going. So I want to thank you for this conversation, because this is what drives me too, are these kinds of conversations, and the work that you're doing, Runa and Mary Lou. It's wonderful to know you and know what you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I have one, just one common question that anyone can answer. It's something that has always been baffling me. Now, people who have experienced war, like, you know, my parents or my grandparents' generation, or people who have actually seen the disastrous effects of nuclear war, those are the people who have been making so much changes right now, creating the treaty to ban nuclear weapons. My challenge is, how do I get the youth to understand the detriments of war or nuclear weapons? Because they don't know it. They're in the system of climate change because they get to see climate change, and that is something which is evident right now. But how do we get them to understand war? Because I think it's so important to prescribe for peace while there is peace, and not during war.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so yeah, I think we could probably have another discussion about this.
Yes.
But
I was going to say, that's not a simple question to end with.
It's very
Yeah, then I thought I'd
complicated.
just end with that.
Yeah, it's a very good opening for the next program that we might do. So thank you for planting that great idea. Because, and I think because there are young people in the anti-nuclear weapons movement, particularly in ICANN, which I know you're familiar with. It'd be good to ask them, why they involved. And I have 21-year-old daughters, and they one of them is quite clued into the world at large and says, it's terrifying, the idea of we're all going to be blown to bits by a nuclear war anyway. So so she's an activist, but that piece of it's very hard for them to grasp because it's so final. So let's definitely table that for another time, because I think that would be a great segment to do. So we will, Raleigh and Nora and I will talk about that for sure.
Good.
And so I think we probably should wrap things up, and just want to say a huge thank you to all of you for being here.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
And to those who tuned in. It is recorded, so we will send a link around, and hopefully you can, all of you who are here today watching, will send it to all your friends and encourage them to watch it too. And I did put in the chat the websites of our 3 wonderful guests, so you can have a further look at their work and the videos and the art. So please do that. And over to you, Raleigh, to wrap things up.
Yeah, thank you so much to Mary Lou, Runa, and Jessica. And yeah, thank you so much to everybody who joined in. And yeah, of course, thank you to Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung, Nora Löhle, and to Beyond Nuclear International, Linda Pentz-Gunter, who did a wonderful job with the moderation. And yeah, I hope everybody who tunes in, yeah, stays in touch with us, because the 3 of us, Böll, Beyond Nuclear, and Goethe, we try to do a few things every year together, and we have already started a scheme about some things that are coming up next year. I know that we've been throwing around that 80 years of the Manhattan Project is next year.
Oof.
That might be something that we'll use as a jumping off point for something, but nothing's nailed down yet. But there's a lot of things that we are brainstorming. We're always, whenever we have our Zoom calls, we throw around a ton of ideas. So we really look forward to continuing to put out programming like this as a sort of trio. And yeah, so thanks again for our guests and for our visitors who have tuned in. Hope you all have a great evening or whatever time it is.
Yeah.
And also good winter holidays.
Yes.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
It was wonderful. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.